Hello and welcome to TIM-DND. Today I'm going to talk about my recent Dungeons & Dragons session with my kids and how I nearly total party killed them with goblins. A total make-do encounter which didn't really have any impact on the storyline, nearly wiped them out. So let's talk about it. So the encounter was set up. We've got a dwarf paladin, a wood elf druid, and an NPC character floating around with them who's only level 1. The cats themselves level 6, so they should be able to handle a fair bit. I set up 12 goblins, and then because 12 goblins alone would be massacred by magic and slaughtered by axes, I added in a hobgoblin chieftain and a wyvern that he was riding. And I'd been building up the encounter. The encounter had been built up. They'd been chasing across country. They'd had wolves in the distance that they could hear. They knew they were being tracked. And above them, they could hear the flapping of livery wings. And because of previous encounters, they thought that might be a blue dragon that they'd let free. There was no way I was bringing that blue dragon in just yet. It's way too powerful for their level. And despite what my stepson thinks that it owes them a favour, it's probably going to try and kill them. But the encounter itself, because in the past I've set multiple creatures against these characters, and they've either used magic which has totally wiped out the potency of the creatures. In one case, orcs, which just kept falling over in a sleet storm and could not actually get near the characters. So that's why I added the wyvern and the hobgoblin chieftain. The wyvern or wyvern, I don't know how people like to pronounce it, with its flying can overcome some of the issues that the spells like sleet storm and what have you can cause. And the chieftain, with his multiple attacks and slightly higher ability to hit and better armor, gives some sort of challenge for the more physical dwarf paladin character. I expected the goblins to basically be cannon fodder, which would give the characters a sense of, dominance and power by just slashing through them. I never work out my combats according to the rules in the book. I don't think the system works particularly well anyway. It's very, very complicated to try and use and takes half the fun out of the game. I prefer the characters to use their abilities to try and deal with situations in an interesting way and basically deal with whatever situation I throw at them, either by fighting or running. But in this situation, they'd run as far as they could and then ended up in this farmstead, which I'd set out with some nice new buildings that I'd bought and painted. And their intention was to hole up in one of the buildings. I thought they'd probably use the house, but as it happened, they used the farm, the stables over here. And they all holed up over there before the goblins had made it to the farmstead. And then at the last minute, the dwarf paladin decided to move over to the house and hide out on the roof in the chimney. I think he did that intentionally because he wanted to be able to see what was going on around. The druid had laid some animal traps down by the door of the area they were lurking in, and they thought they'd got things slightly covered. The goblins made it into the farmstead and started moving around. One or two goblins got caught up on the traps. that the druid had laid. The dwarf managed to roll a ridiculous number on stealth, despite his armour and everything, which meant he was totally hidden, even from the wyvern and the rider as they flew overhead and landed in the courtyard. So far, so normal. I was expecting all of this. They almost always roll lucky rolls, and I almost always roll poor rolls, and then they massacre everything I put in front of them. And that's when things changed. My goblins, which I didn't expect to be able to hit very much because of the level of the characters, and if they did, they wouldn't do very much damage. The dwarf, his armor class is above 20, which meant that most of the goblins would need to be rolling 15s or more to even get close to hitting or damaging him. In fact, no, 16 or more, I think. So realistically, the goblins shouldn't have had much of an impact. What did happen, though, is that the druid then cast a sleet storm on the goblins, and because they'd had a lot of luck with that with the orcs, I think they expected themselves to have a lot of luck with that with the goblins. Goblins have got a higher dexterity than the orcs and didn't seem to be affected as much by the sleet storm. And the dwarf, paladin, knew that he couldn't enter that sleet storm, so his attacks were basically totally blunted by that. He couldn't move in to attack the goblins, so there was nothing going on there. In fact, it took about 2 rounds before the characters managed to kill a single goblin. By this time, the goblins had pretty much free rein to move around as they wanted to. Most of them had got out of the range of the sleet storm. The druids stopped the sleet storm. The goblins headed towards where this magic was coming from. And the druid and the human NPC level 1 fighter that they needed to protect found themselves being swarmed by creatures which were heading towards their location, including the hobgoblin, who'd left his mount in the middle of the courtyard. And I was starting to think, I'm not sure how these characters are going to get out of this situation. The dwarf jumped down, he started hacking into some goblins and eventually got into combat with the wyvern as well. He does so much damage with his divine smite, but the first roll he made again when he hit the wyvern and used divine smite at a level 2, he did a very poor amount of damage. I think he rolled 1s and 2s on most of the dice. He's using a magical frost axe, which rolls an extra 2d4, as well as the d8 for the axe, and the 3d8 for the divine smite. And I think he did a piddly amount of damage, which barely touched the wyvern's hit points. And I knew I was in for a long slog here. The combat, in the end, took over 10 rounds. By round 5, the hobgoblin hadn't been damaged. The wyvern had barely been touched. There was maybe 2 or 3 goblins dead. And all the characters had been using the spell slots and healing and other abilities that they'd had. And they were running short. And they were feeling the pressure. I was feeling the pressure. And none of us really knew how we were going to deal with the situation to make this basic encounter, which hadn't intended to be life-threatening to them, into something which they survived. I hate fudging dice rolls, so I don't like doing that. But it was getting to the stage where even now I was rolling 19s and sometimes natural 20s on my attack rolls, and then having to think, what am I going to do if these characters start dying? It was really ruining the day. Everyone was getting a bit miserable. I was feeling miserable. And eventually it got to the stage where there were maybe 3 goblins left. And the only way I could really see that this fight would be resolved, that the wyvern was probably down to about half damage, the hobgoblin the same. Um, and I thought, if I leave these two in the fight, the characters are dead. And in the end, I decided that the hobgoblin would mount back up on his wyvern, and he flew away because his large army of goblins had been damaged. And he obviously didn't know how much damage the heroes had taken. This didn't feel particularly narratively satisfying. Um, the players were enjoying that aspect of it, but they also knew that they were in dire straits. Um, my stepson's paladin was asking about maybe the dragon coming by and helping them as as his favour, and that didn't particularly feel satisfying either, because that just means you've got an NPC coming in and rescuing the party. Um, but what do you guys think? How would you have resolved this situation as dungeon masters? How would you have resolved the situation as players? Um, they were using all sorts of spells. They used the druid used wild shape on herself to turn herself into a brown bear and started hacking into things, but then she'd get hit, and she lost the wild shape at least once. Um, the level 1 character got separated, so they were all in different parts of this courtyard, which meant that they were getting swamped by monsters. Um, and I don't think it was any fault of theirs or any real fault of mine with designing the encounter. I felt I'd given them a defensive position that they could make the most of. Um, the monsters, the goblins, should have been able to be wiped out. Each turn they should have been able to kill at least one of those each, if need be. The wyvern was a little harder, but I mean, the previous session they'd destroyed a chimera in about 3 or 4 rounds. Admittedly, it was on its own, but it was able to maneuver around them, breathe fire, and all sorts of things at them, and they dealt with that no issue. I feel the only thing that went wrong with this particular encounter was the heroes had no way to escape if that was how it happened, and the luck was just against them and for the goblins on the day. I was rolling, as I said, 19s and 20s. I don't think I rolled many attack dice which were under 12 or 11. Most of them were above 10, and most of them were in the high teens. Um, The heroes, on the other hand, their spells didn't seem to have very much effect. When they did hit and attack, they often wounded rather than killing goblins, or wounded poorly. Not a huge amount for the wyvern or the hobgoblin, or missed the hobgoblin because of his armor class. It was a poor outing, and it made me feel bad. It made them feel bad. Um, it made my wife feel bad, who could hear a hell of a lot of swearing going on and kept shouting up language. Um, and all in all, it wasn't the most successful session in the world. And they scraped out, by the skin of their teeth, and hated the session. And I didn't enjoy the session, and I need to move on from it and give them something back, really. But yeah, it was not what I'd intended. It wasn't how it was meant to go, and I don't know how I should have dealt with it to make it better. Um, and that's what I'm asking, basically, guys. Is there any way I could have made this better? So that's the question, guys. Um, I don't need comments saying, well, you shouldn't have put as many goblins in there as you did. I could have adjusted the number of goblins beforehand. The question I have is, how could I have adjusted it after I'd already made the mistake of the amount of monsters on the table? Could I have changed things during the encounter to make it more enjoyable for me and for the players? Basically, I'm asking, how do we fix a problem which we've created at the time without just saying, "Oh, this is wrong," and fudging it. On a totally different subject, please like and subscribe. Please subscribe because the channel is early on in the making. I'm not getting any funding through from the channel because it's new and not many subscribers, not many. I don't get any revenue from the channel, and I can't guarantee when I can bring out videos. So the only way you're going to catch up with my content is if you subscribe and ring the bell, because I can't work around the YouTube algorithm to make sure my videos get seen. And I have no intention of running my life around an algorithm. So I will bring videos out as readily as I can. And when things like this has happened, I tend to bring them out quite rapidly afterwards while it's still fresh in my mind. So please like and subscribe, support the channel as best you can. It doesn't cost you anything to do it, other than having to see my mug flash up on your YouTube channel every now and then. And yeah, that's the story. Leave some comments down below with what you think could have been done to change the outcome of that awful encounter. And I'll catch you on the next video.